Thank you, Jeff. And good morning and welcome to the United Nations. I guess for some of you, it's the first time that you're here as an associated NGO, or you could also be a new representative of an already associated NGO. That's what these orientations are for. I think those of you who have been around and may have attended previous events, you are now joining about 1,400 NGOs that are associated with the Department of Public Information. The Department of Public Information is one of the larger departments in the United Nations, based not only at headquarters, we are also based in the field. We have 63 UN information centers. Jeff mentioned 2 that I happen to work with in my career. What is DPI? I mean, I think if I give you a summary of maybe our mission statement, maybe that gives an idea of what we are trying to do as a department, as one of the many departments in the United Nations. The DPI's mandate is, our mission statement, that the department is dedicated to communicating the ideals and work of the United Nations to the world, to the wider public, to interacting with and partnering with diverse audiences, and to building support and for peace, development, and human rights for all. Inform, engage, act. And you'll find this mission statement on the DPI website, on the UN.org website. Why does the United Nations need a Department of Public Information? Because the United Nations is funded through public contributions or from assessed contributions from member states, and that is public money. And in your own government, you always expect transparency and what is that money used for. And it's also the organization that is aspirational on trying to create a better world for humanity, and therefore the work that takes place in these walls between member states when they come here and agree on issues related to development, to peace and security, to human rights, it's the right of peoples to know. Some of you may have seen the first words of the Charter of the United Nations, which starts with "we the peoples." So the department basically tries to bring the outside world in through different means. Historically, the main tools that DPI used to communicate what was going on within these walls was by the old-fashioned press release. There will always be in official meetings a group of press officers. Usually they sit on these tables and they would churn out in 2 languages, English and French, press releases summarizing what that meeting was about. Then came television, radio, and then subsequently 20 years ago, the internet. So we have website. So you have work that is done using traditional media, accrediting of journalists. There is a core of about 200-300 journalists that are permanently accredited to the United Nations. They cover the affairs of what is going on through news stories that they will use through their own newspapers, radio, or television networks, or blogs at this stage, and that continues. The DPI has its own news center on the website, which is one of the most visited actually pages, because it is seen for many parts of the world in the 6 official languages. And this is the other aspect of what we try to do. The Undersecretary General of the Department is also the coordinator of multilingualism in the UN. So we try to also cater to the needs of all member states, not just the English-speaking ones. So what we try to produce as much as possible, the news items, the coverage in, at least on the websites, and the radio in the 6 official languages. In radio we have actually 2 other languages, Portuguese and Kiswahili. The UN information centers were created in the 50s, some go back to 1949, because in those days there was no internet. There was basically people needed physical presence to actually communicate and be able to spread out the publications, or to have a library that the members of parliament in that country could consult on what was decided on at the United Nations. So DPI also produces publications, basic facts about the United Nations, or the United Nations at a glance, the Yearbook of the United Nations, and a few other publications informing and that are used as important tools to educate about the UN or to learn about the UN for people interested in working in the UN or in getting to know maybe a career at the United Nations, what it would entail and how one would get to do that. With time, we are now also using, of course, social media, and instead of publishing in hard copy, we are now publishing for mobile devices, either as apps. You can download the Charter of the UN on your iPhone or your Android. There's a calendar app where it has the full days of observance that the United Nations has approved, whether it's the World Refugee Day, Human Rights Day, or International Day of the Toilet, or International Happiness Day. You'll find it on this app, and it's not just telling you when it is. It actually gives you background, resource material, information, and direct links that you can use in your own social media use about those specific days, which are important for member states to have designated them as such. The UN also designates years. International Year of, this is the International Year 2014 of Crystallography. I didn't know what that was until it was decided a couple of years ago. It's also the International Year of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. 2016 will be the International Year for the Pulses, 2000 and so on. So it's a selection that member states agree on to give a certain issue some further opportunity to be discussed. Social media is something that we have started to work with for the last 3 years, because 20 years ago or 15 years ago, people started saying, if you're a company, you don't have a website, then you don't really exist. So the website was it. Now, if you don't have a Twitter account, if you don't have Facebook, if you don't have YouTube, if you don't exist on Flickr, if you don't exist on Instagram or whatever, then you don't exist in the world of communication. So DPI has been very active in that. We have established a cross-divisional team that works really small numbers, but we have so far, in terms of social media, DPI has more than 2 million followers on Twitter, about 5 million on Sina Weibo for the Chinese language, and so on. And that's something that is continuing to grow. So that's direct products we produce, information about meetings or decisions, communication campaigns that take place in the building or that relate to what member states have agreed to or the Secretary General has identified as priorities. But in addition to doing that, we realize also that we have certain limitations of how far we can reach, whether through direct media or social media. And this is where you come in. And this is where what is a cornerstone of our work in the division of outreach division, which is my division, which is partnerships. Because we believe that the UN is the world's #1 multilateral organization that is, by agreement, trying to create a world where there's no war, to create a future where future generations are saved from the scourge of war, have better opportunities for development, where we work towards ending poverty, rule of law, and human rights are respected, regardless of who the person's beliefs, background, ethnicity, religion, or lack of it are. So to do that, we have started, and I think our partnership with the civil society, with NGOs, goes back to the early days of the department. DPI associates NGOs that are interested or that have a communication program or public information outreach tool that they can take information and maybe share it with their own membership. So the 1,380 NGOs, about 1,400 NGOs that are associated with DPI, what we expect of you, first, welcome to be associated with the UN. I think that is a privilege and a responsibility at the same time. We hope that what you are exposed to in terms of information, access, that you also share it with your own colleagues, with your own membership. That the issues that you hear, that you come to meetings, that when you come to briefings, that you come and raise those questions and raise those issues. Other than the briefings that we organize every Thursday or every other Thursday, which are webcast and are also promoted by social media with the the team here or by people in the audience, that it is an opportunity for civil society and NGO representatives and the wider public are more involved with what is going on at the United Nations. And the annual really highlight opportunity for that is the DPI NGO conference, which for 60 years was held in New York, and then for 4 years went to Paris, Mexico, Melbourne, and Bonn. And this is the 65th. This year we are going to hold the 65th DPI NGO conference, and it will be held here in New York. The dates have been set, 27 to 29 August, and we hope that all the newly associated NGOs will find this as a great opportunity to participate directly in the highlight event of the year for the engagement of NGOs. And it's probably the only NGO stand-alone conference, a United Nations NGO stand-alone conference. You will find always on the side of, for example, the Commission on Social Development or the Commission on Status of Women or other meetings of the UN, there are side events, and whenever there are large conferences, there is always an NGO attached conference or a civil society engagement. But the DPI NGO conference is the only stand-alone NGO conference, and it is a United Nations conference. And this year, the theme, as we have discussed with the previous town hall meetings, and tomorrow there will be a town hall meeting that Anne-Marie Carlson here, who is the chair of the DPI NGO Executive Committee, will be discussing with the two co-chairs of the conference, Jeff Brez. He's the chief of the NGO section, but he's also the co-chair of the planning process for the conference. And Jeff Huffines, who is not here today, but I guess he will be here tomorrow, he's the other co-chair representing the NGOs of the conference, and he would be, once the conference starts, he would be the chair of the conference. So the town hall meeting tomorrow hopefully will decide on a final title. I mean, the theme of the conference is the civil society's views and contribution on the post-2015 development agenda, because this is something that is now on the agenda of the United Nations, on the agenda of the President of the General Assembly. He's holding several consultations, I think 6 thematic consultations this year to contribute in that process. The Secretary General has a special advisor on that who is also conducting work, and they have solicited input from high-level panel that have provided contributions to that, and there's all these consultations taking place, and we thought that it would be also paramount that the civil society and NGOs have an opportunity to contribute to that process through the DPI NGO conference. Of course, post-2015 development agenda is not a standalone issue, because there's another important event taking place this year, which is also an important agenda item for the Secretary General, for the UN Secretariat, and for the member states as well, which is climate change. On the 23rd of September 2014, this year, the Secretary General is going to hold a summit, a high-level summit on climate change. So the conference will also look at that issue as well. So when we talk about the two proposed titles, whether it's 2015 and beyond, our call to action, 2015 and beyond, our action agenda, it's broad enough to indicate 2015 and beyond, the post-2015, an action agenda or a call to action. It's actionable. It's what civil society's role can be, should be. What can you do to influence that process? What are your views on those issues? And how you can make a difference in the deliberations that are taking place in these walls between member states. And it doesn't have to be only here. Back home with your own legislative members of Congress or Parliament, what are the views that civil society brings to the table on what falls under this overall title, whether it's climate change, whether it's the post-2015 development agenda, or completing the MDGs, because we're not forgetting about the Millennium Development Goals. 2015 is the year when we look back and see over the 15 years what has been achieved. Did we actually meet all the goals, all the targets? So this is why we think this partnership is very important, because I personally started my work after graduation with NGOs before joining the United Nations. So if NGOs and civil society is an important component of what is going on in the world today. DPI also partners with academic institutions. On the one side, there are 27 universities in the US that are also actually accredited with DPI as NGOs. They are associated, like you are, as NGOs, but separately, we have another initiative called the United Nations Academic Impact, where we have more than 1,000 universities around the world in 110 countries who have joined and become members of the UN Academic Impact by pledging to undertake at least one or two activities a year within the framework of 10 broad principles that more or less commitment to the Charter of the United Nations, working for sustainability, gender equality, the education, human rights, and so on and so forth. And that's another kind of partnership that we try to ensure works to promote the principles and goals and activities of the United Nations and what it is doing and what it's trying to achieve. The other partnership, and Jeff is also involved in that, we also, again, going back to what I said earlier, we realize our limitations and how can we reach a much wider public. We probably all watch television. We watch not just the news. We see films, we see documentaries, we see feature films or television series. And the creative community or storytellers have a much wider appeal and ability to reach than a press conference or a press statement. Working with celebrities is another way of doing that. And you all know, I guess, that the UN appoints goodwill ambassadors or messengers of peace. And those are prominent people who are dedicated and have an interest in a special cause within the issues on the UN's agenda that are often willing to lend their celebrity status to promote that specific issue. If you look at a small example, when Angelina Jolie, for example, visits a refugee camp in Turkey for Syrian refugees, or in Jordan, or when Jane Goodall, a messenger of peace, talks about the extinction of or near threat to wildlife and so on, and protection of environment, they have a much bigger audience than we do. When I said we have 2 million followers on Twitter, we recently appointed Lang Lang as the most recent appointment of a messenger of peace, and he has 50 million followers on social media in China. So that's a kind of comparison that you look at, and it's those kind of people that they have a much wider reach that we try to work with on a specific issues, and they're very, very committed and very dedicated to those issues that they work with. But other than their celebrity status, we also try to work with filmmakers directly. If it's a documentary filmmaking, it's straightforward. We have archival footage going back to 1945 when the UN was created, and we have requests and have had requests and entertained requests to share some of that footage. If the documentary film requires interviews with experts, we would facilitate that. If they want to film on site at a peacekeeping mission or in a country that is undergoing certain problems and they need access that we can facilitate through the offices of the special political mission or peacekeeping mission, then we would help them do that. We've also worked with feature filmmakers and television series, because sometimes those issues, and maybe easier for social issues and human rights issues, you can push softly through those to raise awareness over certain issues. Actually, it was in this conference room, or one not very different from it, that we had the premiere of a television series, Revolution, which is now, I think, being shown on television. It was the first episode of the second season. It was premiered here with J.J. Abrams, the creator of the show. And Revolution, for those of you who don't know it, it's a science fiction television series that talks about a future 15 or 20 years in the future where there had been a complete failure of power, electricity. There's a future with no electricity, so it's 15 years in the future with no electricity, and how societies have changed. So the first season we had nothing to do with it, and last year there was a visit to Los Angeles and a meeting with the creators and the writers, and colleagues from the UN spoke about actual life situations. This is a fantasy science fiction show about a future with no electricity. We still live in a world where out of the 7 billion, 1.5 billion or even more have no access to electricity. The film showed the disintegration of societies and the creation of warlords and conflict. And this is a situation that is taking place in life. So there was that kind of conversation that brought current day reality and use of these terminology into the second season, and brought up issues that the return, when there is that situation, you have a return of certain polio and diseases that you have thought eradicated. But what was more important is the social media campaign that accompanied the promotion of the series also started taking straight messages from the UN on those issues and the issue of energy and energy poverty. And energy affects everything related to whether it's the MDGs or climate change or the future SDGs. So these are the kinds of things that we try to do in terms of these partnerships that I wanted to speak about. So in short, to help us, basically, we try to create the material that we hope that you can use and you will find useful. And in return, in those briefings, in those meetings, we also want to hear from you of issues that maybe we haven't addressed properly, maybe we haven't covered with material that you think is needed, then we would be happy to address it. So these are some of the things that over the next day or two you'll be hearing more about. You'll be hearing briefings from other colleagues about also things that have to do with the building. But when you have a free time, I mean, just go and visit the UN website, the news center. Just get an idea of material that you will find there. And we are always looking for opportunities to help you more. So if there's an area that you feel we can provide more information, better information, then please do let us know, and we'd be happy to provide that. Earlier this year and every year, the department, for its own internal use and with its immediate partners, issues what we call the communication priorities for our area communication priorities for the year. And that's usually issued in December, January. And we have shared that with the leadership of the NGO Executive Committee, and we're happy to share that as well with you, or maybe a briefed version because it's a bit of a long document. So that can give you also an idea what are the priorities that we are looking at over the years. Where are the areas where you can maybe help or contribute in a briefing or a suggestion for a briefing or a speaker. The other thing, and this will be the last one I mention, because I think if there's a chance for some discussion, maybe we can have a few questions. It's a cross-cutting issue, which is in all areas that we're working, we all recognize that youth and youth issues are now more important than ever before. The numbers of young people today, this is the largest generation of youth the world has ever known. There are about, depending on which age you take, it's either 1.2 billion to 1.8 billion young people or youth in the world today. The Secretary General last year, recognizing the importance of youth and young people, it was one of his 5 priorities, working for and with young people and women. He appointed a special or an envoy, Secretary General's envoy on youth, a young man from Jordan, 28 years old when he was hired. Unfortunately, he's in Qatar today, so usually we invite him to be part of the the orientation program so that you all meet him. But what we have done in terms of the NGO briefings and the NGO association, there's a new category which is NGO youth reps, and we encourage you in your own organizations to associate or to involve young people in the work that you're doing with the United Nations. A few years ago, each associated NGO received four passes, but now we issue, in addition to those four, 2 more for youth representatives. So you get 4 for your NGO and 2 for youth reps, and that's an opportunity for young people to come into the United Nations and learn about the work of the UN, but also gain experience and maybe contacts that will help them in their future work, either in the civil society or in the United Nations. You never know where they might end up working. So that's more or less a bit of a brief summary of what we try to do and why we think this is a very important partnership. And just looking at the time, I think I will stop here, and maybe if you have any questions or queries, I'll be happy to take them.
Thanks very much, Maher. Very much appreciate it.